Good morning, folks.
Good
Glad
morning.
you were able to get your coffee and make it in time. Hey, Michael Couch. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. Good to be here.
Good.
Hi, Shannon.
Hey, Sam. How are you?
Hey. I'm dog sitting for Kyle and Shista right now on Crown Point.
Okay.
Getting used to house life.
It becomes you.
Yeah.
Go for it. All right, folks, settle in. Got a few minutes before we actually start. Hi, James.
Hey there, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm good. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, coming through
Good.
just fine.
Great.
So, uh-oh, we got a little bit of echo there.
That was me. I'm sorry.
Okay,
It's moving my microphone. It makes a little squeak.
alrighty. Well, I'm gonna give folks a couple more minutes to come in, and then I'm just gonna do a couple of slides to give some context to why we've invited you here. So I can do the Perry Mason thing. You're probably wondering. And then I'll hand it off. You want to, as folks are coming in, make sure that you're able to share your screen real quick.
Sure. All right, here we go.
Looking good.
All right, passed the
Cool.
first test.
Alrighty, sneak preview. Right. Wake up. There we go. Let's make sure we got the right one. That's what we want. Cool. Ooh, Jeff Hill, where in the world are you?
I'm back in Coos Bay only for 48 hours.
Okay. Well, thanks for squeezing in an hour and a half for us. I appreciate it. Good morning, Nora. We've got a group of folks that are still filing in the door, and most of you are familiar with Ocean. So I'm going to go ahead and start up with the warm up. And that way, those folks that are joining us for the first time, there's only a couple, understand a little bit more about who we are and why we're here talking about this topic. If you wouldn't mind, even if you have been a regular participant, it helps Sam out a lot as he's tracking who's showing up for what. Just drop your name in the chat. And if you feel like you'd like to say something, I'm representing an organization and I'm curious, or whatever it is, then that would be wonderful. We'd love to know that. My name is Shannon, and I'm a volunteer executive director for Ocean, Oregon Coast Energy Alliance Network. Of course, we look at all types of advanced energy, but right now, today's focus is going to be back on what originally brought us together in our inquiry, which is floating offshore wind. We are, as a reminder, recruiting board members. There's a couple of vacant spots that we would really love to fill. We're looking for representation from the tribes, South Coast tribes, preferably. We're also looking for representation from elected officials. So, James, one of the reasons that we were introduced to James, let me see, somebody is not muted. Who is that? Bob, I think Bob Westerman, you might be. No, it's not you. Craig Nykirk. I think I found him. There we go, all quiet. So one of the reasons that one of our members at Advesian introduced us to James is because they're well familiar with our concept and understanding of how large scale projects are traditionally designed. It's a little bit of a black box. A lot of the project details get worked out behind closed doors and not necessarily with a transparent matrix of decisions going forward.
Hello there.
Oops. Hi there. And by the time they hit the street for public comment, they're much less pliable, and there is a much higher likelihood that they will be challenged or even litigated. So we're trying to really lean in and build on the fly, as you will, a new model where we can project shape right at the beginning. So not necessarily slow down projects if they seem like they're worthy and have a potential for meeting all of our objectives, then let's try and shape them right from the beginning. We're driven by a sense of urgency. We live in an area that receives all of its energy by catastrophe-prone routes through very congested lines. James, those of us, I'm talking to you from Coos Bay, and we've got a lot of folks down here along this final stretch, the southern stretch. And there's no connectivity there. So we're at the end of a really super long extension cord. Our power, reliability, and quality is lower than the rest of the state. We have higher frequencies of disruptions, and those are going to increase in frequency and duration. The other thing that we're facing that we haven't felt in our societies yet, but we certainly will, and that will come in the form of rolling brownouts and blackouts that are not catastrophe induced, is we are facing vast amounts of resource inadequacy. We need to build 200 gigawatts on the West Coast of new resources in the next 6 years. We only have 270 gigawatts of renewables on the West Coast now, for context. So this is a kind of build out like we've never seen before. And in the back context of all of that, our coastal climate, our communities are hit by just about every catastrophe known to people. And we're always preparing for the 9.0 seismic event. This just out last week. Things are progressing quicker than we had hoped. So any signals that we are sending out now, and the energy sector sends out a lot of carbon signals, any signals that we are sending out now are going to impact our kids' kids and on down the line. So we both need to react to this climate change, those of us who are really heavily exposed, like out on the coast, And energy security is one of the tools that we have to take care of ourselves and each other, and simultaneously quit with sending the large carbon signals that are continuing to fuel our increasingly rapid change. So in our engagement, we try and reach out to those who don't typically think about energy, but who will be definitely impacted by the development of these projects, get information out and listen. What are the priorities? What are the priorities for the use of the energy? And what are the concerns for the conflicts that might come from that construction? And then turn that around out into advocacy. The last bullet here, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, is what we're really talking about now. That's the federal agency that is figuring out what areas off of our shore would be suitable for potential development of floating offshore wind. In support of that effort, our State Department of Land Conservation and Development has done an amazing job of overseeing the development of a marine spatial planning tool to help all of the stakeholders understand where are those priority areas with the data that they have available, and how can we kind of figure out where are the prime places for wind, and also where are those prime corridors for our sensitive species and those hotspots for fishing that bring us our sustainable seafood. So using the tools that they have to the best that they can. After this process of about 2 years of a lot of stakeholder engagement and those tools, they took in the input and came back out with a draft call area or proposed call areas. They're quite large. This is consistent with what Ocean and some other stakeholders had requested, not because we're suggesting that that vast amount of area should be developed at this time, but because we wanted to make sure that there was ample room for flexibility between now and when the call areas are actually winnowed down to those areas that will be available for lease. The belief being and the concept that the bigger playing field and the more opportunities we have, that gives us more opportunities to avoid conflicts and work with all the stakeholders collaboratively. So that's where we stand right now. Here's the proposed leasing schedule. So boom, this just happened, end of February, we're all talking about it. The wind area designation is going to happen pretty quickly. So we'll see that coming about in 6 months, but our lease sale, our bids are actually going to go out or proposed to go out late in 23, third quarter. There have been two, there was a 6-hour meeting that BOEM hosted to announce the draft call areas for all of the task force members, and the public was able to attend. And then the Pacific Fisheries Management Council and BOEM held a second meeting the week after that. That was really hosted by PFMC for its members, fishers and seafood processors on the West Coast, to do a deeper dive and have a further conversation with BOEM. A repeated concern that we heard was that there wasn't insufficient data on fisheries and ecological data risk assessment, and that the call area and the whole process should be postponed. As I said, at Ocean, we are understanding that concern and looking for other ways that we can get a richer data set and some better tools that will allow stakeholders more access to how these decisions are being made about where the actual footprints of the final 3 gigawatts will be. We do feel an immense sense of urgency, both in terms of climate and resource inadequacy that we're facing, to maintain progress and maintain the timeline that has been proposed. So we're looking for ways that we can help that process that work for everyone. So with that context, one of our members at Advesian connected us with James because she thought that this might be the kind of tool that we would be interested in. So after talking with James, I invited him to present to you all. And these are some of the questions in my mind. Could this spatial toolbox help us to refine our call areas for this phase of the call before they go out to bid, so we have a higher level of confidence? And then 2, could that work provide us with the foundation of a larger, longer term cumulative assessment so that we could optimize our planning for floating offshore wind all along the Pacific coast that is resource developed consciously and holistically for multiple use scenarios. And with that, I will turn it over to James Morris.
Great, thank you, Shannon. Let's get my slides up. And Shannon, 15 minutes, 20 minutes? What is that? Is that about the right amount of time?
You can have as much time as you want. I know you've got a hard stop at 10, and I think that this is really important data, but it's also rather dense. There's a lot of information here. So
Sure.
if you're comfortable with it, would it be okay if people ask questions along the way, or would you prefer to go through and come back? What seems to work best with folks?
It looks like we have about 18 or so people on the call. I think we can stop along the way. I'm totally comfortable with it being casual. Feel free to interrupt, and we can work through it, as we go. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. Thanks for your flexibility.
Okay, great. Well, Shannon, first of all, many thanks to you and Ocean for the invitation and opportunity to share some thoughts with you and some vision for marine spatial planning. My name is James Morris. I've worked in the National Ocean Service for about 22 years. I actually live on the East Coast, but I run a spatial planning program that works around the nation. And so I've worked in pretty much every coastal region of the US, as well as some international work as well. I'm a marine ecologist, and of late, it seems like I've been studying more human marine ecology than actual marine organisms, because the ocean is a very busy place, and it's a place where we are dependent on it for our blue economy. We understand and value the natural resources that exist there, and we look to the ocean with great hope for renewable energy that will increase quality of life and overall chart the course for a more sustainable future. So I appreciate the earlier comments and the visioning that you've laid out there and the concerns that you have. I work specifically in our National Ocean Service, National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science. Our center is a national center that provides many types of different natural resource support for coastal managers. We do habitat mapping. We do biogeographical assessments. We work to support conservation planning and conservation management for marine protected areas and the like. We provide a lot of support to state agencies as they work towards conservation and blue economy management and planning. And then more recently, in the last decade, we've really worked to build a national infrastructure for marine spatial planning and marine spatial ecology assessments. And it's in the context of marine spatial planning that I'd like to talk with you today about how we can do more better together in terms of bringing spatial intelligence to the table. So I want to share with you some of our sort of thoughts along those lines. Again, feel free to interrupt me as we go, and then if you want to raise your hand, maybe Shannon, you can direct traffic if you like to do it that way, if you have any questions.
Sounds good.
So the first point I'd like to get across is that NOAA is essentially the central intelligence agency for the ocean. We have now for over 200 years been gathering coastal and ocean intelligence. Today, we are unquestionably one of, if not the world's largest ocean intelligence agency. We have fleets of ships. We have ocean observing systems. We utilize aerial sensors. We utilize satellite systems. We have satellite systems. We have, tremendous amount of infrastructure, millions and possibly even billions of dollars worth of coastal and ocean intelligence gathering systems that are every day out gathering intelligence. There's just a tremendous amount of data that is being collected and is available for better understanding our oceans. We have been working to try to, over the last decade, transition our data-rich gathering environment into more spatial modeling and spatial prediction type scenarios. And we think about the spatial toolbox in NOAA as having three compartments: data, in terms of development of data, warehousing of data, managing big data, and there you have your regional ocean portals, which we provide support for. You have your regional associations. You have your topical geodatabases, which are like, habitat mappers and those kind of things. We have marine cadastre and support that we have developed over the last decade with support from BOEM, which is the largest geodatabase we think on the planet of ocean data. It's very important to kind of understand that we're talking big data here in that sort of data compartment of the toolbox. There's also modeling, and this is an area that we have not traditionally worked in, but over the last several years, we have realized that to do marine spatial planning, it is really a requirement to do it well that you think of everything at the same time, simultaneously think about the ocean ecosystem, and that requires spatial modeling. So we'll talk with you more about spatial modeling in just a second. And then we have tools, and tools can be built for many different things, for visualizing the ocean, processing data, doing site assessments, and those kind of things. I want to impress upon you that we're really talking about big data. By anyone's definition, big data. Our AquaData catalog now comprises more of 33 million data layers around the nation. That is a tremendous large amount of data layers. Obviously, some of our oceanographic layers can have hundreds of data layers located within them. There's also, when you think about data itself, we're in the billions of data points, because we think about the AIS traffic data and other types of data that encompasses our nearly 4 million square miles of ocean space in the US. You're really talking about millions of data layers and billions of data points. Again, by anyone's definition, that is big data. And what we have been working to do is to build the computing infrastructure and the modeling methodologies to be able to handle big data. And we have built regional scale ocean planning models now that takes, in some case, days or on the order of weeks to process those models and to run those models, because they're working in a data-rich environment. Specifically, suitability modeling is a type of spatial modeling that is inherently critical for understanding the ocean. Suitability models really provide an opportunity to look across an entire study area, to incorporate various data layers of varying weights and scores, and to be able to build a heat map that essentially shows where within that study area there is the highest and lowest opportunity for whatever your planning objective is. And we recently completed suitability modeling exercises for the Gulf of Mexico and the Southern California Bight. And I'm going to show you a little bit of those results as an example today. When it comes to suitability modeling, there are essentially 5 different modeling types. And looking at the top left, there's characterization analyses. Now, this is a type of modeling that can be used to provide highly descriptive detail about how the ocean is being used and the natural resources that exist there. The next type of modeling is a bit more complex. We call it constraints modeling. This is modeling to look at whatever you're attempting to do, whether it be conservation or wind energy development or moving or creating additional shipping lanes or whatever the planning objective is. This model helps you understand what is limiting that from happening, where it would be not possible to develop a conservation area, where it would not be possible to do wind energy area. So that constraints modeling is foundational. It helps you understand where it's not possible to do something. A suitability model looks at the other areas where it may be possible to do something and helps you understand in a relative sense where are the best areas and the not the best areas for certain types of development. That really is sort of the linchpin, if you will, to be able to look at the whole study area, and you get a heat map like the one on the right there that shows in varying degrees of suitability how that works in terms of that suitability overall scores. And then the most advanced type of spatial modeling is trade-off and scenario planning, where you can look at the possible options and in terms of looking at the spatially explicit scenarios there, and then the cost benefits of all of those different scenarios. We have not really delved into, in a marine spatial planning context, suitability modeling and scenario planning and trade-off analyses at the level that we see in other areas of the world, particularly in places like Australia and Europe, places that have engaged in marine spatial planning at a very sort of high level, both in terms of the social science as well as ocean governance policy and co-use and environmental protection, all working within a suitability modeling construct. And we can talk a little bit more sort of about that. The way that we, let me talk to you a little bit about how that study area there that you see on the right-hand side is just an example. We're able to, in the past, for those two ocean regions, for the Gulf of Mexico and Southern California, we've been able to model in 10-acre grid cells. So all those little dots that you see there in that study area, and this is just a study area off of Santa Barbara that we did for aquaculture opportunity areas. There you can see that's a 10-acre grid cell resolution. Each one of those 10-acre grid cells were scored based on the model that was built. And it gives you really high resolution and understanding about what's happening at that scale. We believe a 10-acre grid cell is possible given the amount of data and the big data that exists available there. So why do suitability modeling? Why make it a sort of a standard approach for all ocean planning? One is that it considers the whole ecosystem. Many times in our spatial planning processes, whether it be for energy or commerce or transportation, things like that, we rarely see suitability models being used that incorporates, all of the available data or as much as possible. What we generally see the process is that is very stovepipe, just looking at one issue at a time or a few different issues at a time, using a map viewer that may be able to display maybe 5 or 6 different data layers simultaneously, but then those are turned off and additional ones are turned on. What a suitability modeling allows you to do, it allows you to interact with all those data layers. And for the previous models that we built for Southern California and the Gulf of Mexico, we were able to work with hundreds of data layers simultaneously. That allows us to calculate those suitability scores per grid cell. It also identifies hotspots of conflict and opportunity in a straightforward way. There you can see the map on the right-hand side. It's really easy to tell where the most unsuitable areas are. Those are the red areas. Those have the hardest conflicts. And then where the green and the blue areas are, the areas that have the highest opportunities. This requires setting rules and developing prescribed methods. Now there's great, the disadvantage of that is it's labor intensive. You have to go through each data layer. You have to understand the compatibility with your planning objective to that specific data type. You have to understand the relative impact of that data type on your planning objective, whether it be renewable energy or whatever. And so the first construction of these models are the most laborious because you have to understand policy, you have to understand the community, the stakeholders, and what's driving those positions and understanding. It requires giving weights and scores to those various data layers, but it provides the opportunity, once you've built the model, to do scenario planning. And it also provides defensible methods. We're very, concerned, I guess, all of us are, about the black box problem, for example. So we're very excited to be able to, we're working with BOEM in the Gulf of Mexico region. We're talking with other regions about helping them build a model, building a model for them. They're setting the rules in terms of the weights and the scores. We're working to provide advice to them in terms of that process. But the value that is being communicated about the ability to communicate with the public and communicate with all the stakeholders about the precise methods that were used to score the areas for opportunity, and to use a modeling approach like this for wind energy areas or for scoring lease blocks in terms of opportunity to inform lease sales and those kind of things is tremendous value, once the spatial intelligence, is gathered. And then, I'm a marine ecologist. So what we're really trying to, think about is how do we avoid not seeing the forest for the trees? and sort of an ecosystem-based approach, ecosystem-based modeling can really help us get further down the road in terms of making sure that we're looking at across all human uses as well as natural resources simultaneously, and really looking at the whole ecosystem of the study area.
Hey,
All right.
James.
Go ahead. Yeah.
We have a question from Bill Gorham here. Bill, do you want to clarify your question?
Sure, James, you got a lot of data here. It's very interesting what you're doing. It's great stuff. Question I had was how you deal with data quality. You got many data, but some are better than others.
Absolutely. So we will, number one, before including data in a model, it has to meet certain qualifications. It has to be of sufficient quality. For the previous models that we built, we restricted the data to what we consider to be authoritative data. We did not pull in data sources that we had any question about. Sometimes, there might be some, citizen science type data sets. There might be some, we did have data sets from NGOs in there, like the Audubon Society, Bird Data, those kind of things. Data set had been vetted, previously published, those kind of things. But by and large, we work to try to vet those data sets and ensure that they're from an authoritative source. We publish the metadata that comes with those, which includes the methodologies and the temporal and spatial scale of the data. Those are published as part of the atlas, the publication from those models. And we anticipate continuing to keep that QA/QC on data very high in the process.
Thank you,
Great,
James.
thank you.
I have another question there on the black box. Is that kind of like the black hole of information? Is that what you mean by that? Or?
Well, I guess what I mean by that is, regardless, it's just not renewable energy, but it might be working with a state agency or something like that. Sometimes spatial planning can be highly subjective, and unless you build a model that kind of looks at everything. For example, a decision might be made, that is weighted more towards the benefit of a fishery, or more towards the benefit of viewshed, impacts for homeowners, whatever. That bias many times is unquantified in the decision-making process by the decision authority. What we are suggesting here, especially for renewable energy, is that we partner with BOEM wherever we can. We, the intelligence agency for the ocean, bring the best data and bring marine spatial planning modelers and capacity to the table, and we work to basically demystify the suitability process by providing highly prescriptive and detailed modeling methods that anyone can look at and understand and repeat to some degree if they have the capability to do that. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or thoughts before we move on? I'll show you an example here. Okay. So the next slide gives you an example of data. This is the Gulf of Mexico. So we're very fortunate right now to be building wind energy area suitability models for the siting or designation of wind energy areas in the Gulf of Mexico. We this week are in the process of beginning to run those suitability models, and we will, over the next couple of weeks, finalize those suitability models, and BOEM will take that information and will make the decision about where wind energy areas are in the Gulf of Mexico. So we have about 360 data layers within the suitability model geodatabase, and I just want you to look at the distribution of data. There's 84 national security data layers for the Gulf of Mexico, 147 natural and cultural resources, 66 industry, navigation, and transportation type data layers, 13 fishing data sets. There's mostly fishing. There's only a couple aquaculture operations that are in the Gulf of Mexico. And then we have 33 metocean and 15 boundary type data sets for a total of 360. Imagine how impossible it is for anyone to look across 360 data layers and understand which way is up for that ocean space. That's impossible. And suitability modeling allows you to sort through and handle all of that data for the whole ecosystem and understand the ecosystem in the context of your planning objective. How do we do it specifically? Let me just walk you through the quick methods for this. We've showed you those study areas. I've showed you how the sort of the final product of the heat map. The process is very simple. We grid the ocean, we grid the study area in 10-acre grid cells. We use hexagon grid cells because hexagons are they fit better to curvature data, and of course the ocean has a lot of curvature data. So you have a larger number of neighbors, and so you're able to fit more curvature data to that particular study area. We have the statistics and the analysis, behind the scenes about why hexagons, but we're able to get a more accurate analysis out of the hexagon grids as opposed to square grids. So our ultimate goal is to calculate a suitability score for each one of those grid cells. There's two types of geospatial data. There's categorical data and continuous data. Categorical data are data that basically are presence and absence. It's either there or it's not there within the grid cell. We go through all the data layers that are categorical data layers, and we assess the compatibility of the planning goal, let's just say renewable energy development, with that particular data layer. So there are some examples here on the left-hand side. Hard bottom habitat. For this particular model, we scored hard bottom habitat as not being compatible. This was an aquaculture opportunity area, like a wind energy area, but for aquaculture model for the Gulf of Mexico and Southern California. And their hard bottom is not compatible with aquaculture development, largely because these systems require anchoring into hard bottom. Hard bottom is a protected habitat. There's just really no tolerance for aquaculture development within hard bottom habitat. So that gets a score of 0. For example, if there's hard bottom habitat within the grid cell, it gets a score of 0, which means that it's not compatible. There are other data layers, though. Let's just pick unexploded ordnance as a national security data layer, in which the compatibility may be possible. There's uncertainty in compatibility. For those data layers in which it may be possible, we would give it a score of 0.5. And then we're able to essentially calculate the combined score, average all those scores together across those 100 or 200 data layers, and get an average score for that particular grid cell. And now you can see how that particular grid cell is likely to have a different score than its neighboring grid cell in terms of higher or lower compatibility based on all the data and how it's represented within that grid cell. The second type of data is continuous data. This is data like fishing data or vessel traffic data. There could be an infinite number of values for that particular type of data. You can have 100 ships, you can have 0 ships passing through that grid cell. And so for that particular type of data, we use a polynomial function. We fit a function to the data where we give the lowest score, not quite to a 0, but almost to 0 for the grid cells that have the highest number of, in this case, ships or whatever the data type is. And then we give the highest effort the lowest score. So the highest numbers of ships get the lowest score, the lowest number of ships get the highest score, and it's fit to that curve. And that gives us a relative sense about those particular data sets that have continuous data, about compatibility. Ultimately, all of those two data sets are averaged together, and we get a total final suitability score. We have in the past used a 4 submodel structure. This could be, it could be lower number of submodels. It could be a higher number of submodels. It kind of varies depending on the different the planning goals, of the resource agency, and how they would like to weight different issues. For the Gulf of Mexico, we were looking at potentially, 6 or 7 submodels that take into account logistics of developing wind energy and those kind of things. And so here you can see this is a pretty simple one that we did for aquaculture opportunity areas. There were essentially 4 submodels. There you can see national security, industry navigation, agricultural and natural resources, and fishing and aquaculture, each at 25%. There on the left, that just shows an example of equal weight of data layers that go into there. Now, this is where, there's a whole lot of, of work that happens to work with stakeholders and work with the resource, agency or the action agency to build the submodel structure that reflects the values of society and reflects the planning goal, of the agency. So it's a big deal to sort of build that model. Ultimately, you're able to get a final score for the grid cells. You then can use cluster analyses and other approaches to go into group and find like areas that have the highest compatibility scores. You can search for as many of those like areas as you want to, and as small or as large as you want to. And ultimately, you can find the best places in the ocean for your planning objective. And that cluster analysis and precision locating spatial approaches can be done at the wind energy area level. It can be done at the call area level. It can be done at precision location of turbines, or other types of development. So to give an example, we recently, just before Thanksgiving of last year, we published 2 atlases. These are, our comprehensive 500-page spatial models, data-rich, 200 something maps, for aquaculture opportunity areas for Gulf of Mexico, Southern California. This was a presidential executive order directed study, and we think it is the first of its kind in terms of comprehensive ecosystem-based spatial suitability modeling, at this level. Here you see on the left the various results of the submodels that I just mentioned to you. These are essentially heat maps. The red areas that are constraints become final constraints, because it doesn't matter if it's not constrained in one submodel. If it's constrained in any submodel, it's a constraint in the final result. And there you can see the areas that are blue and yellow and red that represent the areas that have varying levels of suitability. So we'd encourage you to check out the AOA atlases, looking at as an example the sort of ecosystem level comprehensive marine spatial planning. We are now working, with various agencies and BOEM and within NOAA to think about how we can do more better, this type of spatial modeling, building on the infrastructure that we've built with BOEM and with other partners within NOAA, over the last decade. We think we're there. We think we're ready to move forward on this. And given the urgency of renewable energy development around the nation, we're working to try to figure out how we can do more, better, faster. And so really the take home here is think about regional scale, ocean regional scale suitability modeling. Everyone can use it. Everyone, we feel like, needs this sort of type of intelligence. And we see many different applications for this going forward, both being responsive to immediate decision making, as well as looking forward a decade or 2 or 3 decades or more about how the oceans are changing, whether it be climate change related or ocean use pattern changes, doing sort of forecasting, spatial planning for wind, renewable energy research, fossil energy development, all the blue industries, conservation, climate change, all those lots of different applications for the here and the future, going forward. So with that, we really just skimmed the surface here. Would love to stay and talk with you, about any of this. If you have any questions, or frankly, if you have any suggestions, we're really just getting started in this and working to build NOAA's capacity within this work and building these relationships around the nation. And would love to hear your thoughts and responses to this information. And I look forward to learning from you. So thank you for the time today.
James, can you tell us a little bit more about your relationship with I know the fishing community is vast and broad and has many angles to its organizational levels. Out here we have several also. Pacific Marine Fisheries Council, or Pacific Fisheries Management Council, I always flip that, is one that we've been talking to and really watching. And of course they hosted the meeting. So they've kind of become a spear point, if you will, for the seafood processors and fishers on the Pacific. What kind of relationships have you had with other entities that represent fishing interests, either on the Pacific coast or elsewhere in your work?
Sure. So we had a really great experience working through the AOA spatial planning with fishing industries for both regions. COVID actually helped us with the AOA atlases because we're able to perform a tremendous number of one-on-one stakeholder meetings, over a short period of time. We held hundreds of stakeholder engagement meetings like this one, and presented the data that we had in hand, and we mined for additional data resources, and we explained the modeling process and what we were doing. And so we built relationships, deep relationships with the fishing community in both regions. It also helps that we're NOAA, and we know a lot about fishing. We have fisheries surveys, we have fisheries data, we manage fishing. Our other line office, National Marine Fisheries Service, manages fisheries, and working with the councils, of course, and so there's a high level of knowledge, about fishing, particularly in federal waters. And so we brought that knowledge base, and frankly, fishing is a NOAA trust resource. So we bring a strong ethic to conserve fishing and protect fishing, as an industry, but also as a important cultural resource. And so there's a lot of trust was built along those lines. An example that I like to share on the West Coast is one day Bob Dooley knocks on our door, at our laboratory, and he scheduled a time when to come by and meet. He is on the Pacific Fisheries Management Council. He's a very, as a leader within the Seafood Harvesters of America organization that represents fishing all over the country. And he shows up and he says, James, I want to learn more about what you do. I want to work to get spatial fishing data better integrated, help us better understand the kinds of data that need to be developed and how it can be integrated into these marine spatial planning processes that you're talking about. And so can you help me understand? Can you help me do that? And that's a great example of how historically fishing communities, have not engaged as much as we would like, in the process, largely because fishermen inherently do not want to share where they fish. Like that's just who they are, right? It's who we are as fishermen. We don't want to share where we fish. And so there's a lot of concern around that. But the tide is significantly turning on that because of the potential impacts of different types of development and the squeezing that is happening on fishing communities. And so we were able to gain a lot of traction there, and even to the point that the Pacific Management Council has now developed a Marine Spatial Planning Committee. And so over the last year, myself and some representatives from BOEM, attended a few of those meetings and talked about this work and the wind planning work, and have worked to, identify and improve some data resources that can be used, on the West Coast. And we've collaborated some with BOEM on that and others to improve the data and some data quality there. So it's probably more than you wanted to hear, but those were sort of all the things that came to mind.
Nope, that's perfect. So how long, hypothetically, if you all were invited out to the West Coast and funded to look at the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, maybe Northern California and Washington, how long does it take you to get all geared up and up to speed and the tool is primed and ready to use?
So to build a suitability model, you first have to build your inventory of data that qualifies to be included in the process. And so we were able to get a jump start in the Gulf of Mexico because we had just done this for aquaculture opportunity areas. And so we had a significant, geodatabase. By the way, I should tell you that about 60% of the data in both of those models were from publicly available sources. 40% of the data was not from publicly available sources. That gave us a lot of insight into the requirement to put forth, very accurate suitability models on the need to be able to handle confidential data and data that's of high sensitivity in terms of national security and those kind of things. Being in the government, we have access to a lot of those data that are sensitive data. And so we believe there's an inherently governmental role here to provide high-level intelligence within the federal government family, but also to our administrators and to politicals that are making kind of some of the higher level decisions here. This isn't something we can really farm out, to academia and others because of the challenges associated with some of the sensitivity data. There are workarounds, of course, and those kind of things, but being the tremendous, sort of intelligence agency that NOAA is, how do we harness that, leverage on that, and bring that sort of inherently governmental value to the process here? So the first step is figuring out all the data that needs to go in there, and that process can take months. Depends on where things are with the current status of the geodatabase, how we'll have the regional ocean portals done, how much work have they done, what's the status of those data, what is available in terms of from the state resource agency, other federal agencies, those kind of things. So that data gathering process. Once you have that, the actual suitability modeling process, the longest part of that is working with, in this case, with BOEM and others to figure out the type of model that you want to build. Now, in a few months, we'll be done with the Gulf of Mexico wind energy model. So we'll have a suggested framework or a suggested model structure, and that will speed up. If we were able to do this in other regions, it'll speed up the timelines because we will have a wind energy area, model that we can build from. So, Shannon, to answer your question more directly, you don't run out of data to work up or models to build. You run out of time and you run out of money. That's the kind of the reality here. So what you try to do is you try to look at the amount of time and amount of resources that you have, and you make a decision about whether or not you can do something valuable that increases intelligence in that amount of time and with that amount of resources. So to answer your question, we'd have to look at the situation, see what's possible, see what time frame we're working on, see what capacity that we have with our modeling.
Could you say that again?
With our modeling team, and see what kind of timelines. And we understand that sometimes these wind planning timelines are so short that there isn't time, or resources to do this kind of work. So we're starting to have these conversations in all the regions and try to figure out how to value add.
Fair enough. I see Bill Gorham, you have your hand up.
Yes, James, this is really interesting stuff. Are you familiar with the work that's been done for the Auroral Wind Map? And if so, how that fits in with what you are doing or how it could?
Yeah, so that's a map viewer and a study, right, that pulled together a bunch of data layers relative to the Oregon call area. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's very similar to many other places around the nation that are basically publicly available, geodatabases that give you the capability of looking at a small number of data layers, at a time. It's a great resource. It would be the first place that we would mine for data and to bring into a spatial modeling process. We hope that eventually some of these publicly available resources will have the results of spatial modeling for different topical areas that will help everyone understand, like, let's look at all the natural resources, take into account all of the whales. These are the areas off of our coast that are the most sensitive to all whales, right? Instead of trying to turn on and off all the different whales and look at where they pop up on the screen. So that's what modeling does for us, is it helps us bring it all together and understand it all in a sort of relative context.
Yeah.
James, this is Chris Natenstead. The question around sort of how you deal with uncertainty and some of those continuous types of data, there's a point where you have to make some decisions about how you weight different types of data and which data set you depend on. I'm thinking of some of our fishing data, for example, where if you look at the current maps that we have, in one year, the fishing is happening in one, sort of confined set of areas. But if you look through years, that changes over time. How do you deal with that kind of data?
Oh man, it's hard. It's hard, Chris. And what we try to do is first talk to the fishing communities and try to understand what is not represented in the data. And you obviously have to publish those assumptions. And and that's at some point you're done with data and you move forward with your model, and then you work through the public input process to gather additional intelligence about the results of the model. So that's what the EIS process is for. That's what those public comment periods are for, etc. But you go as far as you can with best available science, best available data.
Okay, thanks. Overall, I love this. I wish we had it already. And even if it's not ready for the next phases, it will be very useful in the future if we can get it done.
A couple of recurring themes that we have heard expressed as a concern, there's one is the data, the question that you were just talking about. Some areas have experienced recovery so that fishers are now able to fish in those areas again where they historically haven't been. So we're not picking up that historical data because they couldn't fish there, but now they can. So those kinds of things. The other one is there was concern, getting back to Sam's question about the black box, about how, and this was reflected in some of Ocean's questions to BOEM also, how do you use the information that you're receiving from the public to define these proposed draft call areas or subsequent areas, wind development areas moving down the line, or the next phases of calls? And one of the things that I thought was particularly valuable about this tool and the methodology that they're using is that there is this transparency of allowing input from transparent input and stating your assumptions about how heavily are you weighting these relative uses. Sometimes there are areas that have multiple high value uses, so you can screen and run different scenarios. It's a pretty fantastic tool. I am, for one, am hopeful that we can move in that direction and get you engaged out here ASAP.
Yeah, to just put this in context here, NOAA doesn't have the authority that BOEM does for development of renewable energy. They will always be in a situation where NOAA is in sort of the lead role here in terms of the decision-making process. What we're working to do is to bring NOAA's marine spatial planning infrastructure and modeling capabilities to the table earlier in the planning process and assist BOEM with the marine spatial planning process. And what we're offering is going down the road of MCDA, multi-criteria decision analysis, which is a standard approach in marine spatial planning that allows you to bring these multiple criteria, all these different data layers simultaneously into a suitability model and based on your planning objective. And so we believe, based on the feedback that we've gotten in the Gulf, talking with many other regions, that this is a valuable thing and something that many folks are pulling for and calling for. So we're working to try to build, interagency agreements and partnerships, try to figure out where we can do this. And this is launching off of the previous work that we did for aquaculture opportunity areas, and that work was funded directly by the Department of Energy and by NOAA to do marine spatial planning in a macroalgae energy context. And so we're at a new place here. We've demonstrated how to do this. We know the BOEM processes are different in all the regions, and the players are different, and the planning of goals and objectives are different. So we're this is what I'm doing is I'm making these rounds, and we're talking about this approach, and we're seeing how we can plug in and how we can leverage on both agency resources. And it's exciting to hear your feedback and to know this is kind of you see value, in this approach.
Thank you, James. Looks like we have a hand up from Whitney with BOEM.
Hi, good morning. I joined this call late and I think I may have missed part of the presentation on the work that you're doing in the Gulf. I'm Whitney Hauer. I'm a renewable energy specialist in the BOEM Pacific office, and I'm a project coordinator working with the state of Oregon projects. And it's actually on a call. Just reason why I was late on earlier today and heard some of this work is going on in the Gulf. So I'm not sure if you've reached out to the Pacific directly, but we'd love to hear more. I've heard the presentations on your aquaculture work, which is great. You know, BOEM we sort of put together, at least from the staff level, you know, a study, we call a study profile on a multi-criteria decision analysis tool. And I think it can be really powerful. I'm sorry that I missed the feedback that we've heard on these types of tools. And I think Chris sort of brought it up in one of his questions, is that if it's possible, so I think as opposed to having the analysis done is really making a publicly available tool where any user could go in and try to do their weighting. I think would be a really neat approach. And it's something that we haven't seen as much in some of the other tools out there. You know, I think it's one thing I think it would be valuable to BOEM as the decision maker to be, you know, in its transparency to be able, if this type of approach was taken, to be clear to say this was the weighting factor that was applied to these different types of data sets. But I also think it would be great to sort of, as communication with stakeholders or other user groups, or, you know, for others to be able to define what those weighting factors would be. So I don't know if that's something that this is coming from a Whitney Hauer staff perspective. I'm not representing, I am representing the BOEM Pacific office, but I'm just, you know, we're starting to have these discussions, you know, already, and would love to, you know, if it's helpful to this group or others. Frank Pendleton is our GIS specialist in the region. And I know, you know, he's been following some of the Eames work and Point Blue with CBI, and anyways, really, really interesting stuff. And glad that Bill already pulled in, you know, Aura Wind Map was the result of about 1.5 years of these different meetings to let people know that this tool is available, and trying to pull together this data catalog of information. So really, really happy that we're not starting from square one. You know, I think we have a lot of great data sets that are available, and some new ones that will be coming online soon. So anyways, I'm so sorry I was late, and I was going to be a fly on the wall, but then with the topic, it's pretty heavy in terms of BOEM's process right now. So yeah, anyways, thank you.
That sounds good. And Whitney, thanks for coming on and sharing that. We haven't reached out directly to your region to try to start a conversation. We got pulled into this conversation kind of, you know, through a side channel. But the reason is that we really want to finish the Gulf of Mexico wind energy area suitability models first before we approach any other regions and propose this as a process. The challenge is that it's going to be too late, you know, for some of the regions because of the timelines that they're under and the amount of time it will take to build, you know, suitability model for wind energy areas. But it won't be too late to inform lease sales and to inform, you know, the environmental review processes and others. So I think there's opportunities for great partnership. There's also intelligence, ecosystem level intelligence that can be gathered that help us understand the impacts or the decision to go to develop into some areas in terms of delays that will occur due to litigation and those kind of things. So there's a way to work through in a spatial modeling context beyond looking at a specific data layer, be able to look at where is the additive risk associated with multiple different types of interactions that happen within a lease block or a grid cell, and compare that to others in terms of the probability that a project will go forward. And so there's there's huge opportunity here. If you can, it would be great to pull together a conversation on your region and talk more. And I think in the next couple of weeks, we'll have some results from the Gulf that we could share internally, be able to show, the work there as an example.
Okay, great, thanks. It's always, I'm sometimes siloed in the Pacific region, and then hearing of other activities in BOEM and other regions, and from what I've been following with the Gulf and that their approach on aspects, it'd just be great to learn from that. So thank you.
Yeah, and we're still learning, as we go here. Our agency, just to be straight shooter with everything, our agency is concerned. We're concerned about no trust resources and operations. And so we have a vested interest in becoming more involved into the spatial planning process and bringing our ability to bring in all the intelligence, to the table that we have. We're in the Department of Commerce, right? We do blue economy stuff. And so we spend millions and millions of dollars working to support shipping industries and with tides and currents data and those kind of things. So we're going to want to have more of these conversations, be more involved in all the regions in terms of spatial intelligence, and to assist with your mission, which is also part of our mission in terms of being within the executive branch to enable renewable energy development. So we have limited capacity, like everyone. We're trying to figure out where we can spend those precious resources for the best impact, highest impact.
Well, that was just the perfect. It's like I sent you little notes for my closing comments. I don't know if any of you are old enough or watched cartoons when you were younger, but the Wonder Twins come to mind. We've been working closely with BOEM, watching BOEM. They've been responding to all of our actions. We're very impressed with NOAA and the agency and what they have. They've got different marching orders. They've got complementary skill sets, though. And I really am hopeful and uplifted by this opportunity to contemplate some proactive planning and coordination between the two agencies. Thank you for joining us, James.
I do have to jump. Thank you so much, Shannon, for the invitation, and everyone for the dialogue.
Thank you, James.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
James.
All righty, I'm going to jump back in here and let you know about some of the priorities that we've gone here, that Ocean's got facing us. And I'm going to step off in 15 minutes. So hopefully you can see why I was interested in getting James in front of all of us so we can start collectively understanding what other tools we have at our disposal, because everyone really is doing something brand new. In the words of the CEO of Idaho Power, one of the investor-owned utilities that serves us, and this was 2 years ago before even the last 2 rounds of climate reports. In her words, we must move faster than we ever thought possible, period. So that's really compelling us. So how do we do that in a way that's responsible and measured with the other priorities that we also have that are just as important? So coming back to BOEM's existing process, so proposed call areas have been presented, and as I said, largely those we were really happy with the strategy of very large call areas, so there's sufficient flexibility within that. And what Ocean is focusing on in the upcoming months is really trying to talk to in an informal process, but engage with those that are those primary users of those spaces and those that understand the risks, ecological risks at a really high level, to develop some hypothetical footprints for the scenarios. One of the questions that we heard at the PFMC meeting with BOEM from the Fishers was, okay, you talk about 3 gigawatts. What kind of a footprint is that? And BOEM's not really in the position to do so, but we can provide some hypothetical footprints So that's what we're going to do, because that Aura Wind Mapper tool is really cool. And our department of Andy Lanier at DLCD has been incredibly responsive to suggestions for improvements that allow us to do exactly what we want to do, which is to play with the tool and run some hypotheticals. What would it look like if it was here? But at least then we can get some theoretical footprints out there for the other stakeholders who are busy catching fish and aren't talking to wind developers. We're also thinking about what other methods like this. Is this a tool that we could suggest for BOEM to invite into our region? So as we move forward through all of the subsequent phases of these processes, we're setting the groundwork for the next 50 years of redeveloping our entire energy grid system on land and in the ocean. So this is a really critical time. We've got our eye on what happened over in New York, and are trying to look at other regions that are ahead of us and learn from their experience. Their areas that were defined after going from this proposed call area to their smaller areas, their lease was live right before we announced our proposed call areas. And I think it blew everyone's mind, the kind of dollars that were brought in. $4.37 billion in high bids, if you add all of these together. That's for the lease. That doesn't include any of the permitting, the design, the construction, the deployment, the operation. This is a lease. I've got this, and as long as I'm operating out there, I write a check, it goes to BOEM, and then it goes into the federal government coffers. Those funds don't come back to the states necessarily. That's not because BOEM did something bad. That's just how it's set up right now. So we're looking at that bite and going, I wonder. Some of the states that are more advanced on the East Coast have been taking some various runs in federal legislation at redirecting some of those lease funds back to the states off of whose shores they are delivered. That seems like a really great opportunity, and maybe the state of Oregon should be working with our federal delegates to contemplate some legislation like that. We're also looking at that next in line, North Carolina. A proposed sales notice was issued in the Federal Register, and what caught our eye was this multi-factor bidding auction that is being proposed. Multi-factor bidding auction allows bidding credits for predetermined elements. And in the case of North Carolina, they focused on domestic supply chain development and workforce training credit. We've got time before our bid sale, which is proposed for the third quarter of 23. So if we were to, if BOEM was to issue or consider multi-factor bidding for Oregon, what would those bidding credits be? What would our state's priorities be? Which leads us to our State Department of Energy's study, which is in support of our offshore wind planning statute for 3x30. Their public meeting number 1 was last week. It was quite well attended. The topics you can see here: citing infrastructure, economic development, equity, and local reliability and resilience. It was very well attended, as I said, and there were a lot of different perspectives and concerns. I think it's a wonderful process. So now we have this opportunity. We've heard what others were saying. We've seen some developments on the East Coast. And by March 25th, we have opportunities to provide Department of Energy with additional resources or thoughts or suggestions. What other areas of study, or are there other tools out there that might be useful? So Ocean is preparing some suggestions for this intake period. We are learning from the New York Bite. We are considering, would suggest that some support for federal policy or a partial redirection of lease sales to our state. And if we were to contemplate multi-factor bids or pre-bid qualifications, what would they be? Project labor agreements, community benefit, local content and supply chain, ratepayer flexibility, fishing and ecosystem conflict avoidance measures. But what are those measures? So there's kind of a blank slate here, folks. It's a brave new world. There are lots of tools out there, and tools are constantly under development. I should add that the next meeting for Odo, that's on a next slide actually, is scheduled in April. They have committed to 2 public meetings, which was defined by statute. Ocean has requested that they contemplate a 3rd meeting that would be held down on the South Coast and in person. So stay tuned, we'll see what happens there. House Bill 2021 created, that was Oregon's clean energy bill that we passed last year for 100% clean. There are no provisions specifically in that bill that require the construction of resources within the state of Oregon. Many of us were concerned about that, and as part of mitigation for those concerns, a $50 million fund was established, the Department of Energy, for a community renewable energy program. The project was launched. I was able to serve on the advisory committee, and it's a really, really cool project. Basically, the first $12 million have been released for this year. We've got $50 million. Some of that is going to go to administration, but it's not too much. And we've got about 3.5 years to spend it. So put on your thinking caps, folks. Community energy renewable projects that also include resilience have an eligibility for up to 100% of the project cost to be paid. So see, that's zero match. These are for tribal and publicly owned projects, and also that 100% coverage of the project is not only for the resilience piece, but it also needs to be specifically for communities that are targeted, that have been underserved. And we did a good job of making sure that coastal communities, any coastal community, makes this. There's $100,000 for planning of community energy and resilience projects. And we are really thinking about renewable hydrogen and the potential for larger scale solar and renewable hydrogen as somewhat of a microgrid that could supply many benefits for some of our critical facilities, like hospitals that reside outside of the tsunami zone and will become kind of that ground zero for our recovery efforts. Anyone has access to this, the links to the program are there, and please spread the word. We want to make sure that we get good projects built, especially down on the South Coast. So I mentioned renewable hydrogen. Why are we looking at renewable hydrogen? We know from previous studies that we've covered in other webinars here for Oregon and the Pacific Northwest, that renewable hydrogen and its clean derivatives are projected to play a leading role in our decarbonization, not only of the electricity grid in terms of grid balancing and resilience, but also in the transportation for maritime, aviation, and long hauling, as well as other clean fuels and derivatives to support direct industry, heating, and even agriculture. You need renewable energy for renewable hydrogen. That's why electrolysis was mentioned in our planning bill for 3 gigawatts by 2030, because in addition to the electrons going to our electricity grid, they can also go to an electrolyzer, which splits water into hydrogen and oxygen and provides us with another decarbonized and very flexible fuel source. If offshore wind is developed and delivered to the North Spit of Coos Bay, it has many factors that make it very attractive for contemplation of an electrolyzer. So we've been looking elsewhere in the world, realizing that we, as Whitney said, we live in our silos and focus on what the immediate challenges and opportunities before us. So when we scope out to the entire world, we realize that there's another port that looks a lot like us. The port of Cromarty Firth is up on the North Sea in the Highlands of Scotland. And we are actively pursuing a grant through Department of Energy's Twin City program that would allow the Port of Coos Bay to be a mentee to the Port of Cromarty Firth. They have 3 gigawatts of offshore wind in their pipeline. They're looking at up to 2 gigawatts of that to be designated for electrolyzers, and are already investigating the different uses, working with the community to establish integration plans with the community for renewable hydrogen and to become a major hub. And we have also started launching our in situ engagement tools. The masks are coming off in some places, in some spaces. It's safe for us to congregate in person. So as you know, Ocean likes to talk to folks where they feel comfortable and where they naturally congregate. A couple of those products are a Happy Gigawatt Hour that we've launched in partnership with our friends at Poet. These are just unorganized invitations for those who are interested in talking and mingling and sharing what they know about ocean energy. Call it gigawatt hour because that's the scale that we play in. Kind of blows folks' minds there. The other one that you will see, we revitalized what we used to call drinking civilly, recognizing that we want to encourage people to perhaps sip those beers, but sipping civilly also allows us to take this show to coffee shops and other places that locals like to hang out and definitely talk about what's on their mind with their neighbors. This Sunday, we will have a sipping civilly at Seven Devils Brewing in Coos Bay, and we'll be talking about offshore wind. So we would love to see you there. And we want you, we need you. We have a very active engagement agenda that we would like to put into full force. There's a lot of information out there, and we want to get out to where people already are and not necessarily interrupt their activities, to give them the information that they want and need, and make sure that they know how to engage. And if they don't have time to directly engage, we want to hear what their concerns and priorities are. We need members. We want folks to help us shape this clean, equitable coastal energy security. It needs to reflect the broad diversity of perspectives and needs that we have out on the coast. And we also encourage folks to engage directly in these proceedings. There's our Ocean Sipping Civilly. If you happen to be in Coos Bay, we'd love you to come by and tell us your thoughts, share your thoughts. And the next planning study, public meeting number 2 for Department of Energy, is April 7th. I don't know what the actual close date is for comments on the proposed call areas. I put May 6th in there and wrote anticipated because we were thinking it might be a 60-day period, and just did the math from February. Whitney, if you're still on the line, is there established close for comments on the proposed call areas?
Thanks, Shannon. I'd like to, if I can correct it, it'll be on the call itself. So BOEM, in terms of BOEM's next steps, BOEM is preparing to issue the call for information and nominations in the Federal Register. And this is the formal Federal Register notice on the call itself, seeking comments on the areas in and around the areas, other uses, and then also soliciting developer interest. That's the nominations aspect. In our regulations, we require a 45-day comment period, and I can share that the call is going through BOEM review right now, and we're suggesting 60 days, but I can't tell you if that'll be the final number or not. So at least it's a 45 day review. So if you target end of this month or beginning of April, so 45 days at the minimum, maybe up to 60 days. So
Okay.
Not much clearer, but hopefully just a tiny bit. I'm sorry.
Well, we'll keep checking your website too. You're very good about updating those opportunities.
For the call itself, it'll be a press release. So anybody that gets any of our emails will get the press release in terms of notifying where the call is. And then I also send out an email that amplifies that press release. So even if you haven't even if you haven't signed up for updates, if I have your email, then I'll sort of send out that announcement. And I know the number of folks on this call are on my email list. And if you'd like to be included in sort of my informal emails, feel free to contact me and I can add you in, or otherwise, Shannon, I think I rely on you to disseminate to the BOEM, to the Ocean group here. So.
All right. Thanks, Whitney. I appreciate the clarification. We're figuring this out. We're new kids, new kids on the block. I apologize. I have to leave now. I'm going to hand it over to Sam to collect any closing comments and discussion. But thank you all for joining. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Shannon. And I'd like to just open it up. If anybody wants to jump on, stay on a little bit more. If there's any questions about today's topics and conversation, now is the time, or we can just all get out of here. Seeing a lot of black screens.
Thank you, Sam. Motion to adjourn.
Second that motion.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bob. Well, with that, unless anybody else speaks up, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn. And thank you all so much for joining us today. And we'll see you next time. Oh, here we got something in the chat. Oh, Whitney, thank you. Thank you, Whitney, so much for being here today and taking the time. Thank you, Michael Couch. Appreciate the comment.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Bill. All right, have a nice day. Bye.